Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Council Business Planning Committee of the Whole for this Wednesday, May the 16th. The roll call this evening, the only councillor that's unable to attend this evening is Councillor McMillan. He sends his regrets. Otherwise, members of committee this evening, starting from my far right, are Councillor Tony Brunet, Councillor Lynn Timmers, Councillor Dave Thompson, and Mayor Sandra Easton. And on my left, it's Councillor Paul McPherson, Councillor Diane Rajima, and Councillor J.D. Pachariva, John by name. Staff-wise this evening, we have to my left Mr. Kirkopoulos, he is our CAO. To my right, we have Ms. Kirkolos, who is our clerk. In the back row, I better make sure I have everything right here. We got Jacqueline Buchanan, we have Carrie Beattie as well, and is that it? I think. Oh, and Angela. Is Angela here as well? Oh, there she is. Hi, Angela. Okay. Are there any declarations of interest before we begin? The agenda this evening, are there any changes that any members of committee would like to make at this time? And seeing none. We have two delegations this evening. The first delegation tonight, Alyssa Lay and Kate Whalen of Integrated Communications, Digital Marketing, Public Relations, to provide a presentation on the journey to exploring notions of diversity and inclusion. And Mr. Kirkopoulos, do you want to make some comments before this begins? And please come forward, by the way.
Through you, Mr. Chair, as our delegates are getting started, I just wanted to provide a little bit of some opening comments for Council as it relates to this particular presentation and why you see it here before you. And I think noticing that Jacqueline is here with us as well from a human resources standpoint. This is a conversation that we've started as an organization, both with Council and amongst ourselves a number of months ago. It's something that was a topic that it was of importance, I think, to us as an organization and to us as a community. And so when Kate and Alyssa wrote an op-ed piece that was published in the Hamilton Spectator, and both of them have a lot of experience within the healthcare field as well as the educational field in Hamilton at Hamilton Health Sciences and McMaster University. There was, I think, some interest expressed on both sides as they start to do a little bit of a traveling roadshow both across the GTHA as well as Niagara region, and so we had expressed some interest and work with them to get them on the agenda. So I won't speak a lot more about their presentation. A number of councillors have read it, have seen it, and I will turn it over to them to kind of take us through some of their findings and some of their studies.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Is this loud enough? It's good. Okay. We'd first like to thank you so much for having us here, and we were reflecting on this on our journey from Hamilton and thinking how unique it was that normally we see these issues coming to council from the community, and we just wanted to commend you for your leadership on this topic and actually inviting us to come and speak to you. So this is thank you very much for having us.
I do want to note a small correction in the agenda. We are not from Integrated Communications and Public Relations. That actually was my signature. So we're actually part of this program called the Civic Action Diversity Fellows. This was the lens that we came with. I would have to say, in looking at the agenda and the title, I was like, oh, that sounds like a really funny sounding firm and really cool. Maybe we should be thinking about something like that in the future. Just so I should note that as an amendment. So to start off, when we started pondering about the notion of diversity and inclusion, we started thinking about why is this important in the first place? And it really boils down to this statement that we have here: a diverse region needs diverse leadership. That's the logic that we operate from, and that's the thinking that we see in all the different cities and towns and municipalities. They are starting to see a trend in the population that they serve and the different backgrounds that they have as well.
And so this is the challenge, is that while we have diversity, our leadership does not fully reflect the unique mosaic of our city. So that's the challenge that we're here to talk about.
So as part of the way to tackle this challenge, we were part of an organization called Civic Action, which is a think tank based out of Toronto with a regional focus. They call themselves a neutral sandbox on tackling city building issues. They have this program called a Diversity Fellowship, and it's a year-long leadership program competitive across the GTHA, where they bring together 25 rising leaders in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area to talk about city building and to really undergo this journey of leadership to become better, inclusive leaders. Kay and I were both very privileged and fortunate to have this experience as the two people from Hamilton last year to sit on this program. So there were 4 components that are part of this fellowship. Leadership assessment was a comprehensive 360 as well as a Hogan assessment to really look at what are your leadership strengths, your areas of opportunities. And there are skill development sectors where we were exposed to a variety of city building topics, from government relations to working with the community to media relations and to design thinking, to really equip us to be inclusive leaders. And then there was a mentorship program where we were paired with prominent city builders to dive deep on the assessment from our leadership skills that we've had and to work on a specific area of development personally and professionally. And the 4th component is a community project where we work with different community partners to tackle a specific city building issue in a specific city.
So despite all of that, and that full year is a very intense year, it was wonderful, but we are not experts. So I want to preface that before we get into the conversation. We had a foundation of city building and diversity inclusion, and the program really, it enabled us to have and build and apply a lens of diversity inclusion in all the things that we do and we say and we were acting on in our city. And this has and it will continue to be a learning process. So we are not experts, but we do have a solid foundation. We're looking forward to talking to you in our discussion to follow.
I remember when I first started the fellowship, one of the first 2 questions I asked, what's the difference between diversity versus inclusion? And some of you might be thinking of that. And we found that this quote by Verna Myers, one of an experts in inclusion, really captures the nuance between diversity versus inclusion. She said diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So you're really looking at, who's being asked to be at the table and who's being given a voice to say certain things and given the power and opportunity to do things and being asked to be invited as part of the table. And that, I think, is a nuance that we found to be very important in every kind of situations that we're in every table that we're invited to sit at.
So the question becomes, why diversity and inclusion, and why now? So beyond the fact that it is the right thing to do, it's really necessary to remain competitive in a truly global city. And so we know that cities are increasingly becoming less homogeneous. As one example, we know that the number of visible minorities in cities is increasing, and that is true for the Niagara region as well.
And beyond that, research shows time and time again that diverse teams are more creative, more innovative, and they make better decisions versus a niche group of experts. So there's a real compelling argument to be made here, combined with facts and studies showing that it leads to better outcomes.
So we weren't able to find any data on how diversity and inclusion impacts city building at the municipal level, but we have a ton of data and information on how diversity and inclusion impacts in the revenue in the business sense. So we know that a 1% increase in diversity is correlated with a 2.4 increase in revenue. So that's from the business sense. So basically this suggests that businesses that are better able to connect with and serve their customers are more competitive. We can apply the same knowledge to cities in that municipalities that are better able to connect and serve their constituents are going to be more effective.
Now, as we started pondering about this topic, we started thinking, what are some other examples that we could learn from other cities who are starting to apply this lens of diversity and inclusion in part of the work they do? And we found this example from the city of Edmonton very recently this year. As a matter of fact, they made a decision to apply a gender lens in policymaking and created the Women's Initiatives of Edmonton to really focus on fostering and promoting equality, opportunity, and access to services and justice, and inclusion for women in Edmonton. And this to us was a solid example of how a specific lens in policymaking could lead to tangible outcomes in the way cities operate.
So what can you do as elected officials? So our high-level questions, and you can write these down, is keep asking yourself, one, what lens and what lenses are we using when we're making decisions? And two, who's not at the table? And we find that by being conscious and asking yourselves those questions, you'll start to open and identify areas to make improvements just by asking those two.
So before you had ask us the hard questions, we have some questions to pose as well. And from a curiosity standpoint, we would really like to know, as counselor, what is one small action that you can take to advance diversity and inclusion in your own communities and your own ward? And where have you seen diversity and inclusion work well in practice? Hopefully you won't all speak at once, but we would really like to hear from your perspective. And then we will open the floor for questions to any of what you may ask of us. So thank you very much for your time and attention to this.
So there's a question has been posed to us. So we'll start with Councillor Thompson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm not really going to take a stab at the first one, but the second one certainly, because I'm still trying to process that one. Even when I read it before, I was just like, I don't know. But the second one, certainly where I've seen an example of that diversity and inclusion work well in practice is probably the Metro Toronto Police, where they've been really focused on hiring a diverse population to relate to the diverse population. And it works very well because it allows them to relate differently to their ethnic communities. I don't know, I just thought that was an example that came to mind off the top of my head.
Totally.
Thank you.
Thank you, through your chair, to the delegation. So I just use an example of the company that I work for in my business world. So we do business in a typically male-dominated field, and so for many years, our board of directors was typically male Caucasian, and a number of years ago, we some shareholders at some of our board meetings basically made it quite clear that maybe some investment to the company was being negatively affected by that male-dominated field. And I can tell you that over the last, I'm going to use a 12 to 15 year window, our board of directors has changed dramatically, where we have a number of females on our board and we have visible minorities, and what it's done for our company, forget the investment on the shareholder side, but what it's done for a company of 7,000 employees, where it's no longer a male-dominated field. We have university women now wanting to come to work for our company because they see the changes that are being made. And I think a lot of times, people look at that dynamic of different things and they see a change. So it's been a wonderful thing for our company in so many ways, just because of that that inclusion. So just a comment.
Thank you for sharing.
Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Foster. There we go. Through you. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. I really liked this information and it really got me thinking. And I think as a counselor, those two statements that you said, that we need to think about what lens we're looking through and who's not at the table. Like if we can just, that could be a small action right there, is to really think about that. Because everybody has a different set of skills, they have different experience, they have different abilities and different knowledge. And the more variety you have around the table, of course you're going to be more successful, I think, in your decisions that you make, and more varied as well. In my past work, I worked with a lot of minorities and I worked with a lot of newcomers. And so I saw diversity in action. We would work together, and there was always varied opinions coming from, people from different countries had such different ideas than what maybe people who had always been here. They made us think about things we hadn't really thought about. So that's my little piece on where I saw it work well. I guess that's I don't really have any questions for you, but I think just getting this conversation going is really great, and that's where we need to start, so.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And I appreciate you
Thank you very
coming.
much for sharing.
Mary Ston.
I also thought these were very hard questions. And so I'm going to talk about it from a political perspective. And I also attended a women's speaker series last week related to energy. And it's really a big field for men. And it was really fascinating listening to all the stories about how they had brought many more women in. And it was just amazing, the engineers and the lawyers, and it was very similar to what Councillor Renee was saying. So in politics, you have to attract, right now, we need to attract more women, but we also need to attract youth. And so you have to set the table for them. And I think that's why in all the communities you see these initiatives where interest groups are actually forming evenings, afternoons, opportunities where speakers come and encourage people by telling them about the work that's available and what it's like to work in the political field. So often I would be called to talk about what it's like to be a woman mayor. And you get asked questions like, what do you do when you go to the door? And a man answers the door and asks you, what does your husband think about you running for mayor? I've never had that happen, but I have been asked that question by other women that have had that happen. So some of it is role modeling and some of it is role playing. But I think it's all very deliberate. I want to go back to your question about the dancing. So I'm going to be really bold and tell you that we had a person of color that worked for the town who I thought fit in really, really well. And not too long ago, I was looking at about a half a dozen or more pictures that this person was in. And in every one of those pictures, I noticed that this person was not engaged. And yet this person was a very engaged individual and very much part of the organization in terms of getting things done. But in every picture, whenever there was an event going on, this person was over here. At the touch a truck, this person was not cooking. This person was over here. And I thought, this person really wasn't engaged. And so I asked myself the question, what would you do? You don't want to be patronizing to people, but clearly there was something that wasn't quite right. This person was not dancing. And I looked at the pictures and I thought, I wouldn't know what to say to try and help this person become more engaged in the group. So I'm going to ask you that question.
I'm going to take that one because I think there were many times where I walk in a room and I feel out of place because the natural instinct is to relate to someone that looks like you. And when you can't find that, you struggle to find what else that you can find to make you feel belong. And I struggle with that dilemma because my philosophy is it takes two hands to clap. You need an environment that's inclusive enough in order to invite the person to come in and to be part of it. But you also need individuals themselves to go to a little bit in the uncomfortable zone, to get outside of that a little bit, to expose themselves to be vulnerable. And I think, in my perspective, is how do you take the two hands to clap together in unison at the same time? And how do you actually, do a due diligence in creating an environment that's inclusive? Right now is Ramadan, for instance, and that just happened late last night. And there were a lot of questions around my coworkers and myself and people that I know, how do we as non-Muslims be good allies, friends, and colleagues to our Muslim friends? And sometimes we're speaking the same language, but we're not talking at the same time to come to a common understanding. And I wonder, who would take that first step in order to start the dance? And who would that follow? And who would lead back and forth again? I don't know if that answers your questions, but I think, there has to be a conscious effort to to take the first step to invite and feel it out a little bit and to see what's the comfort level of the individual or that group, for instance, and to constantly pushing yourself to think, how can we be more inclusive, but also being mindful that there's nuance and differences between each person's level of participation and interest.
So, Mr. Chairman, I would also ask the question, how much risk do you think is involved in being ignorant about the circumstances that you're dealing with? And then, I mean, how bad can the mistake be if you're even a reasonably sensitive person? I mean, can it be really disastrous? Because I don't know about other people, but I always worry about that. I can usually find something to talk about, but you do want it to have substance.
I would say that, Kate, feel free to jump in as well. I don't want to take up too much space, but I would say that context matters a whole lot. The idea of entering a space and very quickly reading that room, knowing that who's in this table and what is the power dynamics. And if sometimes when you're in a position of power, you may not notice that. And going back to those two questions of those lenses and who's not at the table, sometimes recognizing, when you're in a position of power, you have to de-escalate yourself to allow others to rise to power. And that's very hard to feel. I will be the first to admit that's very hard to feel, because I've walked into spaces where sometimes I feel that I'm in a position of power, because even within a newcomer population, there's a spectrum around it, right? Some people are more privileged than others. So, and it's in those situations where I really check myself and switch to a mindset of committing to listening, learning, and being open and exercising empathy. And I firmly believe that those three values of empathy, listening, and learning could really open doors. And sometimes it's a matter of who takes the first steps and who invites the other step to follow suit. Maybe, Kate, you want to add on to that?
Yeah, you know what, it kind of made me think, anyone listen to Metro Morning? Maybe just me. Okay, so I was listening to Metro Morning yesterday, and it was right before Ramadan. And an individual had prepared a PowerPoint for her colleagues.
That was the one I was
so
referring
good.
to.
And she presented, all of like the FAQs on Ramadan. And there was a joke, and maybe you see it on social media. No, not even water. And it was about the fasting and all the questions that folks were getting. And it was really, to your point, about how do I be a good friend and ally to someone, but they're going through something that I have no idea about. And so she prepared this deck, and she put it online, and she said, read it, share it with your friends, do your research, And so I think that was really good, because she put it out there to say to her colleagues, ask me any of your stupid questions, because I'm a sharer. I'm okay with this. I'm inviting you to ask me any of the questions, and I won't feel offended. So, I mean, that's the ideal situation, right? That you have someone who you can ask. But I think that also is, as you're going into these situations, there's a ton of information out there, and there's probably a way to prepare yourself for it, to do a bit of research, to if there are human resource staff on your team who has insight into how to approach these. But I think there's a lot we can do to prepare ourselves to lower those risks. But at the end of it, I think that being aware and being cautious, to your point about context, matters. Doing due diligence, people are generally good. And I think if the intent is good and meaningful and the approach is thoughtful, I think that you're going to land in a better place than had you not tried.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that today at the region, we were talking at great length about the growth plan. And this whole concept of preparing for a new population, because we're nowhere near, we're only like at 1.19%, and it's supposed to be like way above that. We're nowhere near where we need to be, although we feel it. And I have to say that I was really proud that the staff had made arrangements for you to come tonight, because I just felt that after tonight we were going to be like a few more steps ahead in preparing our community and not being afraid to have newcomers in our midst. So
I fully agree, and I think to echo the statement and in my first introductory remarks, I think having us here, you're exactly right. That is the preparation. You're asking someone to say, come and talk to us. We want to do our due diligence and prepare ourselves. So I fully agree, and I commend that. For
Well,
sure.
you took the first step, and we took the next step, and before you know it, we're dancing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Patriva.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. You know what? Your question is very sobering. And I think, coming into the election, that there's an opportunity for us. So talking about our standing committees and how we have residents fill those positions, I think we need to be better at how we do that. We post an ad in the paper and we get them to respond. I think when we're going door to door this year, we need to engage those different groups and people and say, hey, come and join us. I think you've got something to offer. You could be on this or be on that or something and get them involved. And I think a case in point is our Active Transportation Committee that we launched about a year and a half ago. We've got a diverse set of people on there, and to hear the questions and the answers being bantied about by someone who has a handicap, and like a simple thing is the crosswalk button at the main corner in town. And the gal said, well, I can't reach it because there's this pea gravel there and I can't get to it. And we're like, the thought never crossed our mind.
Right.
Very next night when I was out walking the dog, I looked and I went, she's right.
Yeah.
Kicked a few of the stones away. But unless you look through those lenses, those different lenses, you have no idea that the world can be an impediment rather than that open door. So I think we all can do better, and when we're going door to door, that's an opportunity. And when we do have we have a lot of public engagement sessions. I think we need to grab a few of these people and be more encouraging to them and say, you know what, you can make a difference, and join us.
And I think that twofold plan is good, because asking the question about the lenses and being able to try and put that on, but also realizing you will never be able to truly wear someone else's lens, right? So to have the lens, but also to your point about engaging the folks who wear them all day, every day, I think is fabulous. It's great.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the ladies for coming. I think my example would be, I'm thinking about the Syrian families that many of the churches have reached out and brought into our community. And I happen to be married to a volunteer that was part of a committee that brought in a family. And just to see that group work with that family that basically doesn't speak English when they arrive and has really no family here, and to bring them into the community and get them to understand our dentists, our doctors, our grocery stores, our, how to drive, everything from, basically holding their hands right through the process. So just that whole, engaging them and getting them to dance, if you will. And now this particular family a year down the road has their own place, is on their own. Their kids are thriving in the school. They're doing great. So I guess that would be my example of what's happening right here in our own community. And I'm thinking, 10 years down the road and thinking about, this community being, 7, 8, 10,000 residents bigger than it is today, and where are those residents coming from, and they're going to be physical minorities, that are coming to our town, in that whole change. So it's time it's timely, this discussion. It's time to start thinking that way, because generally, we are white Caucasian right now, but that could and probably will change over the next 6, 7, 8 years. We've got some huge growth happening here, and we got a GO station potentially coming that will allow for transportation to the GTA, to Hamilton and places for people to work. So this community could, 10 years down the road, look a lot different than it does today. So, just a comment through you, Mr. Chair, that it's interesting to start to be aware, and be interesting to see what the makeup of this council is 10 or 12 years down the road. So thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Jima.
Thank you, Chair Foster. So I think a lot of times we don't, as you were saying earlier on, recognize that some of us feel different than other people in the room. And I think that it's important for us all to start to understand from a communications perspective how different cultures communicate. And it's something as little as a hand gesture, or something that you're not doing at the dinner table, or the way you hold your head, or even how you put an accent on certain words as opposed to another, can make somebody feel displaced, can make them feel like they're insulted. There's a lot of things through culture that a lot of us don't understand. So is there any sort of advice that you can give, ways that we can all be aware of that, or maybe find a short list of things we should be reading to understand other cultures, or somewhere we can go to really gain an understanding quickly? We should all be looking for that anyway, but.
I'm going to take this one because I wish I could give you a close note. This year is my 10th year in Canada. I came from Malaysia, and I just gained my permanent residency status last year in 2017 in January. I remember when I first arrived, people kept saying, "How's it going?" to me, and I didn't know how to answer because I didn't know what it meant. And again, it was thinking, am I comfortable enough? Can I get out of my comfort zone to ask someone what it actually means without actually sounding stupid? And I went to the person who I trusted at the time, which was my professor. So that's why I say person of authority have an immense power to be able to open that door when someone asks you a question, and you'll be able to answer that. So it was my professor who told me, no, this is what it means. If somebody asks you, how's it going? Don't tell them everything. Just say, not too bad, and move on. And I wish, to answer your question, I wish I could give you a list that tells you that this is a course note of things that you should say and you shouldn't say. I know in many times during a fellowship, we struggled with that. It's like, is this the right word to say? Is this the right kind of context? But I think the other part to it as well is it would get better with broader interactions with a variety of different people. And that's where it gets uncomfortable, being able to relate to someone who doesn't look like you at all, and to always be in the position of, okay, I'm here to learn with a genuine desire to learn, so teach me in that respect. I think that would go really, really far in exposing someone's mind and being able to look beyond the world that you're at. Even though I'm not from Canada, I realized very quickly when I'm in Canada, I'm exposed to so many different people in all parts of the world. And it really made me think that there's so much more that I don't know. So therefore, I'm going to keep pushing myself and being uncomfortable and inviting those conversations and talking to people. And that would make me learn better. And I find that over time, that has helped me feel integrated and belonged in a community. And I feel that what, with all due respect, and what you may be trying to get at is, how do I make others feel belong as well? And trying to be understanding. And I think with that perspective of that empathy and that openness and willingness to learn, being exposed to a variety of perspectives would go a long way. Mm-hmm.
And you being here is helping us a lot to just, because awareness is really the key.
Yeah.
To be aware when you walk into a room that not everybody feels included, and to keep your eyes open, be aware of your body language, be aware of everything you say, and to be welcoming. So thank you very much for coming tonight, and it's timely.
Thank you very much.
I will just build one, because when we were in the fellowship, we actually did get a cheat sheet. Do you remember that cheat sheet? And it was fairly high level, but there's a lot of things. I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know. I've been calling a certain population by a different, like, incorrect name for, like, in months being in the program. And, oh no, I can send it to you. But what it did is, although it was large and I would never have remembered it, what it taught me is that there is a right word, you know, before you go out to that community, or before you, and usually we do know about our days if we're going to be in a certain area. Do my research, like go on and do the research, and just ask the questions so you can best prepare. And that was basically what the cheat sheet taught me. To your point, the awareness, being prepared, and then yeah, just doing the best you can with what you have available to be prepared.
I figured there was a cheat sheet somewhere.
I can say, when I find the cheat sheet, I can definitely send it along.
You can send it over to me as well.
That'd be great, thanks.
Councillor Thompson, a quick final comment.
Yeah, thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chair. Because we're so conditioned in this kind of community to be of a certain ethnic origin, how do you deal with the resistance? I mean, everybody around this horseshoe maybe has an open mind to being inclusive of diversity and whatnot, but there are folks out there that are just not. And how can we facilitate, or how do you see a facilitation of getting them to sort of better understand and include those people that are going to come whether they like it or not, because, you know, these folks are going to move into our community of a wide, vast, you know, very vast, diverse cultures. How do you deal with that resistance, that sort of, it's definitely a prejudice, but, you know,
Take a track. We're going to take a step.
Go for it.
So I actually don't know. This is a very good question, but I'll relate some understanding of the sense of wanting to conform from the perspective of Caucasian, like the folks who are in this room. And the more we hear and the more we believe that no, we should not be inclusive, it's self-perpetuating. And there's been a bunch of different studies. One, I'll just share a story of one of them. Is the waste, like the litter rates in Texas were really high, and they wanted to change the public behavior. And they found out the folks who were littering they named the figure Bubba. It was a person who drove a pickup truck and liked football, and those are the average person, male ages 18 to 35, who were the prime litterers. They released a public campaign featuring football players and country singers, and the slogan was, "Don't mess with Texas." And it was, "Don't litter because Texans don't litter." And they changed the perspective of, we are an environmentally responsible people. Anyways, their waste rates drastically changed in 2 years, but they were changing the perspective of what we do here in relation to this. We are an inclusive town. We are an inclusive group. Leadership is demonstrating that. We're hearing it, and people will naturally want to conform. So the people who aren't inclusive will say, oh, that's what we do here. They'll start to see it as the normal rather than the other, and generally people want to be the normal.
So it's all about our messaging. It's all about our messaging and our communication coming from our community hubs and centers,
and walking the walk, and exactly what you're kind of doing here today is leading and saying, this is what we do.
Anyway, I appreciate it. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to quickly echo a couple of the comments. One, and you bring up really good points as we're going on, and I think we have to walk away from this understanding better what our community is and how we move forward. Because our community really isn't terribly diverse, okay? And so, but it's a thing that's going to change into the future. You guys have pointed it out. It's become very obvious from the way Ontario is changing and moving. And it's just simple things like housing prices going insane in Toronto. We're going to have tons of people moving down into this particular area. But what we can do as a council and into the future is make sure that we've gone through, reviewed policies, reviewed procedures, and make sure that we don't have on no unfair biases or prejudices that might be coming into things. And then it's kind of funny at times. You read through something and you're thinking, oh, that really isn't good for someone to come in. Like if someone has a bit more of a struggle with English in a certain situation, like is it appropriate to slot them off with even hiring practices and stuff like that? So I've had the fortunate part. I worked at Torstar downtown Toronto, and now I'm working for Life Labs in Oakville. And when I went to work for Torstar, it was unbelievable. I was exposed to a community that I had never seen before. I was just amazed at the multicultural aspect of the organization and the way that downtown Toronto truly is. I'm working in Oakville now as well, and I mean I kind of laugh at times. I'm sort of the token Caucasian white guy that's in the organization. I mean it's a hugely organization that's very diverse. We have women that are running the organization, which is great, and I know the mayor will applaud that. But the thing is that I'm seeing that, and I'm seeing the value that it will bring to our community as we go into the future. So I appreciate you guys bringing this forward. So, okay.
Thank you again for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Good luck.
Can I add something before we wrap up? I feel compelled to say this as the only visible minority here. I want to really emphasize to not feel guilty of the privilege, because oftentimes the privilege is passed down to you before you even asking for it. You're born with it. And I see that happen with a lot of my Caucasian friends who internalize the privilege and the guilt for having it and not really sure what to do next because they're crippled by the fact that, oh, I'm so privileged, I'm not sure what do I do about it. So I want to say this because the privilege is not there to make you feel guilty, but it's to propel you to use that privilege for good. And I feel that's important to say that because in many conversations about diversity and inclusion, there are many people and friends that I know that they are not equipped to do the work on promoting diversity and inclusion because they are not a visible minority. And I'm saying this because diversity and inclusion extends beyond just ethnicities, diversity of thought, diversity of age, diversity of backgrounds. So I feel that it's important for me to say this, coming from the experience and interactions with many, many different people who carry this weight in them, but to use it for good rather than for guilt.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time today and have a good evening. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Our second delegation tonight, we have Dr. Andrea Feller and Glenn Walker. What's that? What's that now? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to start over again. Our second delegation tonight is Dr. Andrea Feller and Glenn Walker. They are from the Overdose Prevention and Education Network of Niagara, which is, your acronym is OPEN, which I think is excellent. So, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us, Mr. Chair and members of council. It's hard to follow that presentation without being inappropriate and commenting on it, but I will be happy to say that I'm a non-visible minority due to my ethnicity. And I think there's a lot of overlap in the talk we're going to give now in terms of open-mindedness and comfort around people that we feel are different than ourselves. So thank you for that. Thanks for having us. I'm also Associate Medical Officer here in Niagara in Public Health. And as you heard, Glenn is the head of Positive Living Niagara. So public health here is providing backbone support to OPEN, and Glenn's team is out there on the ground in the field doing all this work, and his leadership as chair of OPEN really has been tremendous. I can say that, I'm unbiased. So tonight we want to give you an overview around, what you hear of as the opioid crisis or the opioid situation, and some local data, and some local info, and then some recommendations from the field. So how did we get here? Basically, we can sum it up as it's a problem that's always been there. Addiction's a problem that it's always been there, but the unique interaction with fentanyl, prescription opioids, and all those things, it's now a problem that perhaps all of us can't ignore. Again, using our power for good and not for guilt. But one of the ways to think about it is you go back to about 2009, 2010, we're past the recession. And then we've got recognition in Canada of increased opioid prescribing, increased opioid deaths largely related to prescription opioids. And then you've got a decision to delist a drug called OxyContin, which is a type of opioid. And then you had some change prescribing practices from that. But interestingly, what we've found, especially in the last 5 years, is that prescribing practices, they stilted a bit at first, but then they've gone up. Prescriptions have gone up, and the number of doses given out has gone down, which is good, but the strength of the drugs has gone up in terms of prescriptions. So you've got the recession, you've got this interesting situation with opioids and prescriptions. Same time, you've got education costs going up, housing costs going up, social supports and connectivity going down, and then income gaps. And certainly this committee knows that better than I do even. So now we're finding that over time, actually 75% of our deaths now are due to the illegal market as opposed to the prescription drugs. And I don't think it's going to be a surprise to anyone to hear that fentanyl and the derivatives, a market was evolved. Some entrepreneurs, I guess, took advantage of that. And fentanyl and its synthetic derivatives are incredibly powerful. You've heard, I'm sure, how they're 100 to 1,000 times stronger than the baseline or morphine. And they're about the size of a grain of salt, so really tiny. And more than that, I mean, this is something really interesting to a nerd like me. So we know that our opioid pathways, so if you think about sort of your runner's high, that has some of it in terms of opioid pathways, those are the same pathways both for chronic pain and social pain. So if you're thinking about untreated or inadequately treated mental health, you're thinking about risk-taking, early dysfunction, you can understand the self-medication aspect of this. So this is a cool word cloud that's actually from our calls 2018 to date. And we know there's many drugs out there that children and youth can access or use, and our adults. Addictions and overdoses is complex. It has many causes. So I talked about the social pain aspect and how that actually piggybacks on the pain pathway. So social circumstances, income gap, education, early childhood, I'll add to it, housing, those cause pain, basically. And the largest impact we know in terms of people's wellness compared to biology or genetics or access to healthcare, the largest impact is from those, what we call the social determinants of health. If we have time later, I can give you an example with a glass of water to demonstrate the pain, and that might help us all after these interesting and deep conversations we're having. But I'll leave that if we have time for later. So we talk about stigma a lot, and I think, again, that diversity discussion was a really good lead into this. So this is important to show that it's really across the board. The darker colors are people who've been prescribed opioids, and it crosses all strata, both education and income. Now, at the same time, the reality is there's a little bit of a trend that you're going to have an increase in knowing someone who's been addicted to opiates if you're in those lower strata. For me, at least, it was a lot closer than what I expected. And again, in terms of putting things in perspective and also stating the facts, Our most recent data for Niagara, for our youth and our children, it shows that by far, just like with our adults, quite honestly, alcohol is by far and away our biggest concern in Niagara in terms of morbidity and mortality. And the smokables come in second. And the asterisks on that graph, it just means that the numbers are low, so interpret them with caution. But at the same time, on the flip side, when I see that about 10% of our grade 7, 8 children have used opioids, that scares me a lot, and a little higher than that for secondary. We'll get our next data in 2019 for that, so we'll be able to see some trends. So you can see this rise over time, and especially that inflection point where it says February, that's getting into 2017, January, February. And basically, to put it this way, is that the deaths that we used to have here, it took, maybe 5 or 10 years for them to increase by the absolute number of 10. So in 2016, we had about 40 deaths. Takes a while to confirm, so that's why I say about. How can you have about a death? But it takes a while to get confirmed data. So we had 40, and then in the last year, we had 60 by the end of October, and we're estimating somewhere in the mid-70s. So an increase like this in 1 year, and you see a similar rise in EMS calls and in hospitalizations, it's unprecedented. And it's the collision of all those factors that I talked about at the beginning. So Lincoln data, I'm not sure how well you can see this on your screens. It's always tricky. So Lincoln, you can see the top left corner, especially there's the darkest heat center for Lincoln, and that's still quite light. And then there's a couple little lighter areas in the top right of Lincoln. And this likely represents about a quarter to half of our overdoses that are needing help, because these are our EMS calls. So this is from last year. It goes until November 30th, but I've had a look at preliminary data this year up until today, actually, and it's really no different. Lincoln is pretty similar to Grimsby, and I think that's an interesting thing to keep in mind. So if you flip really quickly back and forth, if you have nothing else to do, you can go like that. You can see that those dark spots overlap. And what this map is, it's a map of deprivation. So all those things we talked about before, social marginalization, inequity. And this shouldn't be a surprise. I know it's not a surprise. All our municipalities know where their problem spots or their hot spots are. But again, it's important to keep in mind that it's right across the board, and what you're seeing there is the worst of the worst. So what do we do about it? So in Niagara, we've had addictions and drug collaborations from about 2010 onward that were more formalized. And now we have probably the most formalized and organized I think we've been here in 2016, and it's what you heard of, the Open Group. And I want to point out it's not called the Opioid Network, so it's the Overdose Prevention Network. There's going to be another drug coming. I don't know if any of you have heard of cannabis, but that was a bad joke. So, but I won't make any pot jokes. So, we know there's going to be something else. There was heroin in the 70s. Here we are now. Now opioids is the big thing. So it's really an opportunity for Niagara to formalize and work around the known best practices. And what that is the 4 pillars. So you see there: communication, education, data, harm reduction, prevention, access to treatment. So taking out data, those other 4 are the pillars. And with growth happening and continuing in Niagara, as you just heard about as well, and talked about, it's important and smart to start really talking about this in Lincoln. And again, thank you for your interest for that. And I think it's really impressive. And I will mention, just on the access to treatment part, that's in parentheses, or whatever those are called, brackets, because we don't want to duplicate what the LHIN is doing. And here in Niagara Northwest, you have an excellent group with Dr. Joan Belair and the local LHIN sub-region, and we've been meeting with them, and they've been meeting to get a handle around all of that. So with that segue, Glenn will go into more details about Lincoln. Thank you.
Well, we've been talking about what that heat map looks like, certainly in Lincoln, and I guess the good news is it's not one of our hotspots here in the Niagara region. However, when we look at this particular chart, where we talk about interactions by need, this is the needle exchange program that Positive Living operates. And just to look at the number of interactions that we have per year, we distributed 1.6 million needles across the region. And we also offer those supplies into Lincoln. I think when we've talked about providing supports and services, everybody looks at this and goes, wow, look at what's happening in St. Catharines. We certainly have issues well in Niagara Falls. However, what you need to be concerned about is the fact that you're not showing up very much. And when we talk about this area, we talk about people who aren't accessing service, who are hidden, who are using a loan, who are isolated. We have mothers groups that have formed here in the region, and a number of those parents are from this area. They've lost their children. So the fact that our numbers look low is actually a bit of a red flag in this community, saying we need to be more engaged, we need to be more aware, we need to be sharing the messages across the board. As we saw in the chart that Andrew's showing just about income and people who are aware of or are prescribed opioids, there's not a lot of difference across all of those income grids, educational grids. So we have all those people living here. What we don't have is a real visible presence of organizations that are providing additional help and support. And that can be a little scary. As one of the things that we've been doing is offering naloxone, which actually can reverse an overdose. When someone has overdosed, they basically will drop, they go into, they stop breathing. And we're really trying to bring them back. Naloxone has been used very effectively at bringing people into withdrawal immediately, so they kind of snap back and then can access other healthcare services, 911. So we've been offering these naloxone kits across the region for 4 years through Positive Living Niagara. We now have them being distributed through a variety of other mechanisms, which is fantastic. And I think what we see here again is that we are doing some training on the distribution of these kits. And these are actual training of people who are active users saying, I want one of these kits. I've been to a party, somebody's dropped, they needed this. We have one mother that I was talking to the other day. She has a son, and she's actually used 7 naloxone kits on her son, who's been using alone. And she's just in dreadful fear that she's not going to be home one day, and he'll be dead. So it's a very real scenario that's out there. It's not just, people in large groups partying. We're seeing a younger trend in terms of the addictions that are starting to occur. As we're distributing our supplies, we're seeing a younger population now accessing these drugs. So one of the strategies that we've been able to put in place, or are putting in place, is develop a safe injection site or an overdose prevention site. And this has all been in the paper, and it's one tool that we use here want to be able to use here in the region to help people who live in one of these concentrated areas. In particular, what we're looking at right now is the Queenston neighborhood in St. Catharines, to open a overdose prevention site. This is a temporary site that we're operating for about 6 months, and the intent is to really sort of get a sense of will people come and use this site? These are targeting people who are homeless, perhaps are using a loan, are afraid, may want to get help and treatment. And this is creating an opportunity for them actually to come to a safe place, have some supervision, and a real opportunity to talk to people who can help them get connected to care when they want to make that decision. So we are in the process of moving forward on this. The ministry has approved it. We were hoping to move forward early summer. We, at this point, are finalizing our plans to operate this at 120 Queenston Street, which is Positive Living Niagara's office. Part of this is really looking at, are there other parts, other communities in the region that can support this? Again, it's just one component to what we can offer, but certainly it is a valuable resource that we will be adding to our arsenal of supports that are available for people who are injection drug users. Certainly what we're seeing here in this area is that there is this hidden population in the area who are at risk. One of the benefits to what we've been able to do lately is there's been new resources coming into the region. A number of programs have received some additional funding, and we've been able to expand the distribution of naloxone as well. So what we have in terms of supports is that we see now the DSBN is now considering having naloxone available in schools. Kids in high school have been overdosing in washrooms. Nobody knew what to do. It's just relying on 911. So we're also seeing here in these communities, West Lincoln Mental Health, pharmacies, the StreetWorks program is out here. And the StreetWorks program has had some staffing increases as well and offers a van that comes out, 2 vans actually, 5 nights a week. So we actually come to this community, we will do deliveries, people call us, text us, and we drop that off, and we also do naloxone training. So part of reaching a rural community is to have services that come into the community, come to people's homes and deliver service. And this is part of what we're trying to address here. What has been really interesting in the last short while is that for a long time we were trying to access organization groups, the city as well, to encourage the use of and training on naloxone, awareness of overdoses. And we've been able to connect with the Grimsby Benevolent Fund, the Fort, Employment Help, Convos Youth Center, West Niagara Community Care, and the City of Lincoln is now carrying biohazard containers on the trucks. So we've really seen an awakening here in Lincoln, and we're really happy to have this happen so that people can be sort of forewarned, forearmed, and have the resources that are required to help people in this area. I think people quite often get caught up with, well, it's not a problem here. We don't see it. It's not happening. Well, it is happening, and it is a serious issue. And when people want treatment, quite often they're ending up going into St. Catharines. Particularly, we see people traveling from here into methadone clinics into St. Catharines because they don't want to. The resources really aren't here. And again, it's a small community and the stigma that's associated with drug use and saying that you're going into treatment. So, what can we do, Andrea?
Thank you. So we basically aren't here to tell you to do anything by any means. We're not here in any sort of oppositional way. It's really to try to provide you with some thoughts from the field and what folks out in the field in the addictions networks and in the service communities have said. So Open has that communications group, and they launched a social media campaign earlier this month. So action includes things like retweeting, linking to the social media. Naloxone kit posters are going out there, fentanyl posters are going out there, and if there's a way to facilitate that to happen with groups within Lincoln, that's helpful. Encouraging awareness of opioid use and overdose risk within the community. Again, I think that echoes sort of the last presentation around the social norms, the leadership of how you talk about this is going to set the stage here in Lincoln in terms of that ability to talk about it and to potentially decrease the stigma. There's, like you heard, lots of access for naloxone kits. There's opportunities for fire, for other services. So really, exploring that or listening to community groups if they're coming to you. Hopefully you'll have a little more awareness now or understanding about it and be able to say, yes, we had these people come and they can help, and please connect with them. So connecting to Open, there's several ways to do that, and one is coming to our meetings. We absolutely welcome somebody from city staff coming and joining the Open Network. We have staff from St. Catharines and probably other municipalities.
We have Fire from Niagara Falls is on there. We've got a number of different municipalities that are certainly interested in the network itself. Mm-hmm. And I think the key is really from is to be able to show that leadership. And when you're out talking to people, when you're engaging with other groups in community, encourage them to reach out and say, well, why don't you have someone come and talk about the opioid situation that's coming, that is actually here in our community. And you need to be aware. Where are places where we can have naloxone kits available, where we know that people may be using in public places, in different segments of our community as well. So I think it's really important that we look to councils for leadership, and again, that support around the fact that we need to provide these resources and supports within our community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Feller and Mr. Walker. Are there any questions or any comments from any members of committee? Councilor Rajima.
I think you're right that people don't know. They don't know, and I know they don't know. And I think part of the reason they don't know is that I mean, we know what we've heard, and I've talked to Councillor Timmers about this. I think you went to the Sam Oosterhoff's roundtable that he had about opioid prevention and the issue, and you told me some stories about people that, friends of friends, you know, it's happening in our community, and we know it's happening. Some of us know, some of us don't know. And part of the reason we don't know, I think, is because when somebody's child or somebody's friend or somebody's parent passes away from opioid accidental death, or perhaps there's an addiction problem, perhaps it was a one-time thing. If it happens as a result of a drug overdose, it doesn't get printed in the paper, nobody talks about it. It's a small town. I don't know if in bigger, larger communities, if the name gets in there, so-and-so passed away from opioid, I don't know, but we don't know about it. No.
Yeah.
So, what do you do about that? You just keep talking about it, I guess, but people don't know for that reason. It could be their friends, their neighbor's friend, their neighbor's child, or their neighbor's friend's child, and they don't know. They just know that somebody passed away and nobody's really talking about how. So that's a problem for not only opioid addiction and opioid related deaths, but other kinds of deaths as well. But anyway, what do you do about that? Is there anything?
Well, I think, from our perspective, we have to have messaging coming out from multiple sources. So that's why we're saying, can you connect through your regional website where people may be looking for information and that. The other piece, when we had these, just a poster going out with just tear cards about how to get an naloxone kit, the members of OPEN actually met, and we distributed just a number of the members. A number of our mothers took these and posted them in public places. And we had like a 20% increase in calls to come out and do naloxone training. So trying to get just a fairly benign poster with a tear off in public places where people are going to see it, in doctors' offices or clinics, in your public spaces as well, is one way that you can sort of get that message out there. So the person who's using can see this and go, oh, maybe I need to have that sort of safety net in place. I think the other piece too is we need to talk about how do we remove stigma? How do we start talking about it and have that discussion around the dining room table? Or you're at a meeting. Maybe you could raise that in a discussion. Well, yeah, I was at this meeting and we talked about overdoses and it's happening. And people, like you're saying, people just don't talk about it because it's embarrassing. It's a stigma attached to it. But really to say we need to hear these stories. We need to save and protect our families, our children, and our friends. And it's really taking the conversation to people and not being afraid to put that out there. And I think that's really important.
Mm-hmm. And through you, Mr. Chair, if I can add to that, I'll be so bold to say that you've got outstanding communications support here. And I can say that for sure because I know Carrie very well, just to embarrass her. But to be honest, you do have that excellent support. And I think asking staff that question would probably be very fruitful. The other thing I would also say is you might want to think about it like Lyme disease. I come from a place where Lyme was prevalent. I'm coming here and I'm seeing that it's new for people around here. And so how do you get that message out, and how are you starting to get that message out to people? So I think about it in terms of that. What are some new messages that you've had to tell your population about, and see if there's any overlap in what you might do now. I don't know if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. And so when I say we, I mean we generally, as people, as a population, to get the message out, not just as a council, but you made some good points there. But Lyme disease prevention, that's one thing. But it's when people talk about opioid problems and the fact it comes up and they look, you can see that they just have no idea. And I will say that, I'll say, well, one of the reasons you have no idea is because it doesn't get posted in the paper, because da 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 da. And then you see they just become aware all of a sudden, oh, that makes sense. So it's happening all around me, and it makes sense that I'm not hearing about it for that reason. Yeah.
Well, maybe through you, Mr. Chair, I think one of the things that I think is really valuable is to also talk about the fact that, we keep hearing, well, let them die, or they're addicted, or whatever. We get these statements, they keep popping up. And I think the challenge really is saying, well, nobody really set out to go down this path. They've had, the mental health, they're self-treating, they're self-medicating. Medications were withdrawn. We had prescribed OxyContin going out there all the time. And then all of a sudden, oh, it's gone. Heroin use shot up like a rocket in this region as a result of that. People were looking for an alternative to using that drug. So I think bringing that human side of, people have stumbled into this for a variety of reasons, and reasons that you and I may have. And I always find that really helps people to kind of grasp it and go, yeah, somebody in my family's had chronic pain, or they have suffered with addiction, they have suffered with another addiction like alcohol or whatever, even smoking, trying to attach that craving and that to the addiction itself actually does help as well. And that's a tool that we use quite a bit as well.
Okay, good points. Thank you.
Councillor Timmers next.
Thank you, Chair Foster. I think a lot of my questions have been answered, but just the whole conversation within our town has to happen, because it is here. And when I saw those numbers, and you think, well, Lincoln's so low, we don't have too much going on. Well, I personally know 3 young men that have died in the last 2 years. One boy broke his leg. The prescription was an opioid, and he was addicted after that. That was it. And within about 4 or 5 years, he was out of control and he died from it. We've got to stop the prescriptions as well. You've got regular people that are getting a prescription, and next thing you know, they're addicted, and it ruins their life. And that fear is just huge for me. You take your child to the doctor. I took my child to the doctor for strep throat. He wanted to prescribe an opioid. And I said, absolutely not. Why? Why would you do that? Why start your, the fear. When I think about it, I am terrified. I'm absolutely terrified of what's out there on the street. As a mother of 3 sons, what's in the high schools, what's on the street. It's there, it's here, it's everywhere, and people are dying from it. And, Camden is where I live, and there's no dark area in that. Yet, I know 3 people that have died from opioids in my neighborhood, in the downtown block. They could throw a stone and hit each other's houses. Yes, they were connected. But still, it is happening even in those very rural areas. And people are just not aware. They don't talk about it. There's a huge stigma and an embarrassment. It's almost like you don't want to tell someone, my child has this problem, or my husband or my wife. And I think we've got to start the conversation, and we've got to make it okay to talk about it. And I think the more we talk about it, the further along we'll actually start to make a difference, because the more we hide it, it's obviously not working. It's not working. People are hiding in their addiction and dying. So I'm really interested in the kits and getting them out there. I'm really happy to hear DSBN is looking to put them into the schools. That's fantastic. Is that going to happen really soon?
It's in process now. There's discussions going on. Training's actually going on at DSBN.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. And I saw there's some people that have been trained in our area, but not very many.
That's right.
So we've got to expand that. We've got to get the word out that this is available, because people are just simply don't pay attention or know unless they've been touched, I think. Then they really pay attention. So anyway, I really appreciate you being here, and it's something I actually think about a lot. So I really want to see that conversation happen and the stigma go away and start getting these people some help and hopefully turn the corner. Right?
We certainly hope so.
Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Brunet.
Thank you, Chair Foster. Thank you very much for your presentation. It certainly is an eye-opener, and you know, I made some notes from your presentation. So, you know, when you look at the 4 pillars and you talk about education, you talk about prevention, treatment, and enforcement. So in terms of awareness and education, like obviously that's, to me, that's the most critical thing. You know, when I look at your slides and see, you know, on the bar graphs that it's already at grade 7 and 8 levels, you know, to me that is so alarming. And you know, I think it's great that the SBN is making these kits available. That's great. But in terms of, you know, information and connection and engagement, like what is happening in the schools at that early level? Like, you know, what, I guess through you, Mr. Chair, like, you know, what is being discussed at that early level?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. It's an excellent question, and you know, it is interesting. Information education does come first, and I would say that actually we're pretty far down the line with that. There's really not many people out there, like Councillor Timmers was talking about how scared she is of this. There's really not very many people out there who don't know that opioids are bad now. So a lot of that education has gone a long way. So to answer your question through the chair, in the schools, education about substances, substance use, including opioids, has been happening for a while. And that continues. The other aspect from that graph is that purely technically, from a purist data perspective, I can't really say there's a trend yet until I have a third point, which we'll have in 2019. But we had data from prior to 2015, and it was higher. So that was actually really promising. Some of our earliest work, as we started to see the concern about opioid prescriptions and hear about pill parties and all that horrifying stuff, was really to increase the education and awareness. So we did see a decrease. We hope that continues, and then we can call it a trend. So actually a lot of the data is now showing that where we really need to be pushing is around treatment, access to treatment. Anti-stigma is probably the biggest thing right now. And to the point of what Councillor Timmers was saying, you know, we've really learned that this isn't that different from when cancer was the big C. Back in the day, you couldn't use that word. And it wasn't in the papers, to the point of things being written about in the papers, because it was so stigmatized, and so people wouldn't talk about it. And I don't think this is that different at all. And we do see that, just like Glenn was saying, we all have the potential to be there someday. And, you know, some people have a bit more of a predisposition to it, and then they get the opioids and down they go. But it really doesn't spare anybody, and so it's not that different from what we've been through before in terms of the need to decrease stigma. And the other pieces about it is then the prevention. So much about this is about coping and resilience. You know, we've come to accept lately, if I can, you know, editorialize, we've come to accept this stressful, high-paced life. And we've come to accept as a norm, and we hear this from a lot of our educators from mental health in terms of the mental health crisis, we've come to accept as a norm that we normalize and joke about how stressed we are. That's actually not healthy for human beings. And so part of it that touches all of us is how we cope. So some of us are luckier than others, and we can choose healthier coping strategies. A lot of us choose unhealthy ones, like food. I struggle with that myself. A lot of us do. And we could choose healthy coping strategies like running, and that can go too far. And you can become an ultra marathoner or whatever. But if you're in the circumstance, in your social circumstance, where the pain is so great, and I talk about that social pain activates those same pathways as chronic physical pain. That just blows my mind. You're in so much pain, the only thing that's going to take it away is an actual opioid that acts on that pathway, and you're going to do whatever it takes to get that, to relieve that pain. It's no different than anything we do to cope with the stress of our day.
Yeah, thank you. It was interesting because before you got halfway through your comments, that's exactly where my mind was wavering is you know, how there's been that stigma about mental health. And it's only been, at least it seems to me, only been in the last, you know, 3 or 4 years where people are openly talking about it. And we're having the, you know, the Bell Awareness Days, and people are coming out and talking about their, you know, their issues. And it's about just coming out and talking about it. And it sounds like this is right along the same path. So thank you very much for your presentation. It's very, very enlightening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mayor Easton.
Thank you. Dr. Feller, Glenn, I am relieved that you are here. And Dr. Feller, you'll remember that my introduction to this was with one of those mothers whose son died, not here, but in another province. But a lot of the stories that you're talking about rang true. I really want to know what we can do now in our community, because I'm not thinking about the kids that are engaging in this practice now. I'm thinking about the ones who get a license and get out of the community and get into St. Catharines and get into the sex trade and into that whole business about slavery and that whole lifestyle. And I heard more about that today, and I certainly am not liking what I'm hearing. And so we have to protect the people in this area to make sure they don't get going down that road. You will recall, Dr. Feller, that in the winter, I found out from Convos that there were 6 young people that were living at Convos during the day and keeping occupied, and some of them have a drug problem. And at 10 o'clock at night when it closed, they were walking down Ontario Street and making their way to Tim Hortons and sleeping there all night. And that's when the reality hit, because I just had no idea that that was happening in this community. I know all about the pre-kindergarten rates and where the risks are in our community, and I never knew this. I just had no idea it was happening. So I wonder what we can do to support places like Convos better, because places like that they have to reach a point where they don't have the resources anymore. We can say this is not our problem, it's a public health problem at the region, and they're the ones that need to deal with it, but I know that is just not going to work. So I think about Convos and the generosity of those people and the support that they need. But I'm also wondering, Glenn, about the bus. I want to know more about what that bus does. Do you just come in and drive around, or do you wait for phone calls? And what do you have in that bus, by the way?
Well, there are 2 vans.
2 vans, okay.
2 caravans. And we actually take orders for harm reduction supplies: needles, syringes, tourniquets, cooking supplies, safe inhalation kits for crack as well. We have condoms. And people who are active users will actually text us, phone us, and we will come by and we will deliver that, and we will pick up their used sharps. What it allows us to do is to reach every single corner of Niagara region. People don't have to come out. They don't have to go, oh, I got to walk down the street. I got to get my car. We actually can go to them. And those vans go out 2 nights a week. If we go to a location and we try to engage with them, we have the opportunity of having a public health nurse who goes out 2 nights a week with us, and she's doing in-home hepatitis C testing, HIV testing, some inoculations. And as far as I know, that's about the only program in the province of Ontario that does this. We have an addiction counselor goes out one night a week with our staff. And now I have 3 new staff who can also do addictions counseling and really focus on trying to get people engaged in treatment. It's about forming relationships, getting to know people, and then saying, when you want help, we're here. Don't hide. Let us know you need something so that when we're dropping something off, we are talking to you. And when you have an overdose, you're calling us, you're replacing your kit, and we're talking about how can we help you now? Are you ready to go into treatment? And when you are, we can actually come out, then, there, or the next day and actually help them get that type of service. So I think it's really a valuable resource that we've been able to put together, apart from just saying we have an office in a particular location, and we have satellite sites, a few pharmacies and other locations where we actually distribute bundles of safe injection supplies.
So I'm going to start checking the needle dispensaries in the washrooms at the Fleming Center, because then I'll know because I know what's in there now, not much. Mm-hmm. But it would be interesting to know whether or not people are starting to use those, and if that volume is increasing, I think that'll be a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So tell me, I know Shoppers Drug Mart, do they actually give out methadone, or do they give out the naloxone kits?
Well, through Mr. Chair, we have a list on the Niagara Region website of all the pharmacies that do distribute naloxone kits. The methadone clinics are separate from the naloxone distribution. There's more pharmacies distributing naloxone at this point in time as well. So.
Okay, so I think Shoppers in Beamsville does that.
I believe they do, yeah.
And so what are we doing out here? When you make those visits, through you, Mr. Chairman, when you make those visits and you go into the home, is there any support for people who, could they be given methadone at that point?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, at that point, we would actually offer to have one of our staff help make that connection for them.
Okay.
And if they need to get a ride to get to a clinic, we are able to do that as well. So we really have developed a capacity to help get people connected, because we saw this as a gap in service. We'd go tonight, somebody would have a problem, they say, I want something. By the time we circle back the next day, they don't want it.
Yeah.
So with this population, you got to do it in the moment, and you got to do it fast. So we were creating that capacity to be able to react very quickly to people and get them connected to the wide range. There are a wide range of treatment options available to people. It's a matter of getting them connected and making that warm transfer in most cases, helping them to get there. And that's a lot more effective than saying, here's a card or here's a phone number, give them a call. Because what our experience has simply been, it doesn't happen. And then they go into crisis. Then they go to the Emerge, they go to other places, and they're treated very poorly. And then they don't want to go back. So there's this whole, the stigma against people who are injection drug users is huge. And you go to any place that's giving care, and it's a real problem, because you get slapped in the face a few times or treated like dirt, you're not going to ever go back. And we found people with abscesses on the verge of death. We have to actually physically put them in a van and drive them to Emerge. And they're on their deathbed because they will not go, because they've been treated so badly. So I think we really do have to tackle this whole stigma issue. It is monumental.
Well, I'm going to call you because I really would like some guidance around having some roundtables. Mm-hmm. And I think it's time for us to start doing that in this community and see where it takes us. It would be a small thing to start with, and we can learn as we go along and become more sensitive to the situations. Thank you very much for coming tonight.
Great.
And on that note, thank you very much for your presentation. I do have to admit myself, this is not an area that really has been high on my list of items, but I really appreciate what you brought forward this evening, and actually many of the comments from our council members as well, because This is a problem that we definitely have to be addressing, even within our small municipality, so, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Glenn, could I have your card, please, before you leave?
I have a motion moved by Councillor Thompson and seconded by Mayor Easton that the presentations from the two delegations this evening be received for information. Are there any questions on this motion? All those in favor? It's carried. We have no correspondence this evening. We do have one report. That's a report on the appointment of Integrity Commissioner. Mr. Kirkopoulos, would you like to speak to this report?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can just provide Council a little bit of an overview on why we're before you on this report for the appointment of the Integrity Commissioner. Council will recall about 6 months to a year ago, we started through a process looking at a code of conduct, and at that point in time, we spoke with Council about some of the new legislation under Bill 68 that spoke to various elements of councils, municipalities, the need to have integrity commissioners, and the need to have code of conducts, and the various dates that those would be required and that would be coming into effect. And you can see on page 14 of 19, those two dates, January 1st, 2018, respectively, for some of the items like a code of conduct, and then March 1st, 2019. So the report that you have before you does seek to appoint an integrity commissioner before the March 1st, 2019 timeline. A number of municipalities have already gone down this particular road, both here in Niagara and outside of Niagara. And the report does highlight the various elements who we've selected. Council will recognize the name Ms. Atwood, Putkovsky, and Mr. Abrams are part of a firm that are doing a lot of integrity commissioner work. We did go out, we looked at a number of the other integrity commissioners, sought to get some comparative quotes and comparative costs, and their firm remains one of the lowest currently. As you can see, we also highlighted that they are doing some work with various other municipalities, including Mississauga and a few other municipalities in this particular area. So Julie has highlighted some of the more intricacies of the various elements that we'll look at once we appoint an integrity commissioner in terms of the procedural bylaw, closed meetings, some of the other electronic participation in meetings, as well as some additional changes that we could look at. And so both Julie and I are here to answer any questions Council may have on the particular report, but we are seeking your permission to move forward with the appointment of an integrity commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkopoulos. Are there any questions for Mr. Kirkopoulos at this point? Mayor Easton?
Mr. Chairman, through you to Mr. Kirkopoulos. Mike, when you look at the dates here, there was a recommendation in the Code of Conduct that we meet, that each of us meet with the Integrity Commissioner, and I'm wondering if the current council would have an opportunity to do that before the end of council. I don't know, I wouldn't say that, I'm not going to determine whether it's a compulsory thing or not. I wouldn't mind doing that myself, but it could be open-ended and give us an opportunity to have a conversation about our own portfolios and what we're doing, and kind of get some benchmarks in terms of where we stand. I wonder about that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think one of the first things that both Ms. Kirkoulos and I had discussed, and we had discussed it with Mr. Abrams and Ms. Petkowski, was kind of an immediate sit-down or an immediate introduction between council and the firm, and those individual meetings set up so that they could have, and you could have a chance to speak with the Integrity Commissioner, to ask any of the questions that you want to ask, to get clarity on the role, what are the things you should be seeking opinion and thoughts on, how the Code of Conduct interplays with an Integrity Commissioner, and just what the new legislation means, both from a community perspective in terms of protecting council, and for council to be sure of what the rules are as we move forward under the new legislation.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, as time has gone by and the Integrity Commissioners become more active both here and at the region, I've come to realize, and some of it is individual councillor behavior, but I think that it all comes to every community as you become more complex in the way you do things, and that's the protection of council. And I have to say right now that I certainly do not feel well protected by the region of Niagara, and I could not even begin to tell you where they would protect me and where they wouldn't because of some of the circumstances that have happened there. So for me, the issue of council protection is really paramount in our being able to go to the Integrity Commissioner for a variety of reasons, but in many cases to establish what our legal rights are as public servants, because it's no longer as simple as saying we have a lawyer, the town lawyer will look after us. It's not that clean, particularly if your behavior is aberrant behavior and you violate the code. Then where do you stand? These are all the questions that I ask now. So I am anxious to meet with the new Integrity Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mary Easton. Question to Mr. Kirkopoulos. So, and by the way, I'll pass it along when it becomes, it goes onto the website, but John Mascarin gave a very good discussion on Integrity Commissioners at OSAM conference. But one of the comments that he did make was that most municipalities are doing RFPs for this out. So I'm curious as to why we didn't do a request for proposal with this.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, specifically to that, we were initially working with the municipalities across Niagara region, and there was an RFP done through that, and so we used those particular rates and went out and did a request for proposals, since it's actually underneath, because of the size of our municipality, and because there had been existing RFPs and solicitation of quotes done, we used that information and also went out and had conversations with other municipalities. Should we go in a shared services type model? Should we go at our own route? And Ms. Kirkoulos is nodding. A lot of that work had already been done by the regional clerks and that are meeting on this particular case. And I'm very familiar with Mr. Mascarin's work and some of the comments he made, and I followed during the OSAM conference as well.
Yeah, John's had his hands full down at Niagara region, I guess. So, only probably the best municipal lawyer in Ontario is a fraud. Councillor Timmers.
Thank you, Chair Foster. I was just wondering about the code of conduct for the boards and committees. I know it says in here once the Integrity Commissioner is appointed, then we will be working on that. I was just wondering, will that be in place for next term?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Councillor, that will be in place. So there will be a work plan set out, as well as information to conduct training for all the citizen advisory committees, the local boards. There will be a time for training the council as well for the new term. So that is part of what I was working on, that I will be working with the Integrity Commissioner to ensure that the Code of Conduct will be adopted by all local boards as well as the citizen advisory committees.
Very good. Yeah, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. I just had a question also about when I was reading the report, about the electronic participation in meetings. If you could just maybe elaborate on that. It's not closed or public, no, only, okay, maybe you could clarify it for me, when that would be allowed, and are we going to be doing that as well, and how will it work?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So right now, it's not very clear with how this is going to be carried out. A lot of municipalities are not looking to do this just yet until there's further information coming down. Right now, it will be considered not part of the quorum, and when you're in closed session, that wouldn't be allowed either. Right now, it's not very clear. I'm not in favor of it myself until we get more information.
Okay, thank you, Julie. I couldn't quite figure it out when I was reading it exactly.
It doesn't count towards quorum,
Okay.
right?
All right, I was just curious about that. Okay, thank you.
And I also want to follow up on Mayor Easton's comment about, kind of understanding what councillors can and can't do. I mean, the Municipal Act itself is clear on a variety of things, but as all of these new, I got feedback going on here, while our rules and everything else are in place as well, we should make sure that new councillors in particular and the veterans for that matter know and understand what they can or can't do, because the Mayor is absolutely right. There's a whole lot of stuff that we can't do, and there is no defending it by the taxpayers on what it is that we do. I mean, I was I wasn't laughing, but I was kind of noting with the Mayor that she kind of got dragged into the mud a bit with what was going on from the HR practices at Niagara Region when they were hiring the new CAO, and it was like, it was almost to me, I thought it was almost a slander against the Mayor within what was going on with the newspaper. But I don't even know where and how and stuff like that we should be able to defend ourselves, type of thing. So anyway, I think it's just worth having additional discussions in some of those areas. I have a motion.
Sometimes when you lie down with dogs, you get up with fleas.
Yeah.
So that's what I just chalk it up to.
On that note, I have a motion moved by Councillor Renjima, seconded by Councillor Pachariva, that report CS 1802 regarding the appointment of an Integrity Commissioner for the Town of Lincoln be received, and that the staff be authorized and Council accept the proposal to issue a contract for the provision of Integrity Commissioner services referencing legislative changes made through Bill 68 for the Town of Lincoln as outlined in report CS 18-02, and that the Mayor and Clerk be authorized to prepare and execute the necessary agreement to give effect to this motion, and that procedural bylaw number 2016-40 be amended as set out in report CS 1802, and that the Director of Corporate and Legislative Services be authorized to prepare the necessary bylaw. Are there any questions to the motion? All those in favor? It's carried. Councillor inquiries. Anybody have any inquiries? Notices of motion? Announcements? It was the other day I was thinking about this as I was in some discussions with AMO, but if people haven't arranged, if they are going to the AMO conference and haven't arranged things, you should probably consider doing that relatively quickly. I will be personally traveling up on the Saturday morning as I have meetings all day Saturday and Sunday in Ottawa. So, but anyway, and by the way, I'll have a hotel room at the Westin, so that will become Party Central. So, Mayor Easton.
I just want to advise the committee that last night when we had the Cubs and Scouts here, Robert was around, the U-Link bus driver. So he told me that today we were going to hit 1,000 patrons which I thought was pretty amazing. So we must have, it was something like 964. Mr. Kirkopoulos has an even better update, I think.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, as we wrap up, I'll try to keep my comments incredibly brief. Last night was a great opportunity to interact with our scouts, and I can highlight for council they raised 3 things that they want us collectively to focus on. One was make weekends longer. And that was the role of the CAO that they wanted me to address. Another thing was to fill potholes and to clean snow a little bit slower so they can get more days off. And so I said I would definitely be taking that back to council for your consideration. I did want to highlight another thing, and we had talked about both council training and council orientation. This past 2 weeks, I've done a lot more of what I call day in the life with staff. I spent almost an entire day with community services staff. The other day, I dug a hole for a cremation, which was 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, and I did that manually. I dug in a suit, I tossed dirt, then I went and tested out our pool pH and our pool chlorine levels. I answered phones. I registered folks for programming at the Fleming Center for Swimming Classes. I say all that to say I have an immense newfound respect for the work our staff do. I think about all the splash pads we're both looking at and currently have our pools that need to get tested every 2 hours. And I look at our cemetery caretaker who spent an extra 3 hours there on the weekend talking to a family and sharing with them how we bury people, who plays part counselor on some days. And by counselor, I spell that with an S in terms of someone people can talk to when they're in their most difficult moments. And so while I don't want to spend too long sharing that with council, I think it is an important element of what we do. I'm going to encourage senior staff and staff in general and council as we get into the new term of council to spend time to do that. I think to really become acclimatized. I know Councillor Brunet rode with one of our snow crews last year in terms of seeing the work that they do. I think it's been incredibly helpful for me. I've said my job is to go and advocate and share with council what our staff do. So I share that with council, and again, very eye-opening for me. So I'll be having more personal conversations with members of council on that.
Any other announcements? Councillor Njima.
Oh, I'm wondering if Mr. Kokopoulos let the Scouts know that he's already made this future weekend longer. Good job.
Try the bill. She's here all week.
I think we'll continue on. There's no closed session, and I think I'm going to adjourn this meeting.